And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our own healthcare Bill Belichick, Dr. David Levin.
Thank you. Bill Belichick. I appreciate that. Frankly, I think I've been referred to more often as the Forrest Gump of healthcare. I seem to just wander into the frame and good things are happening. I think I need a little guidance about how to tee up this presentation. So while you're doing that, thank you. I don't know. So while you're figuring that, I just want to recognize we have two VIPs here in the audience this morning. My wife, Dr. Beth Levin, and a real VIP, my mother, Ms. Betty Levin. Now, lest you think they traveled all this way to hear me speak, let me be clear. They were here to celebrate the college graduation of the 7th of 8 grandchildren. I get that right, Mom? Yeah, go Wildcats, right? UNH. So don't believe anything else other than I'm just a by the way when it comes to this. There we go. So in about 20 minutes, we're going to diagnose and treat innovation constipation in healthcare. That's kind of a tall order. So we're gonna fly high. We're gonna dip into a few specifics and essentially back into some questions about how we're pursuing interoperability, the technology under that. But I want to point out a couple other things as well as we go along. So let's start with the diagnosis. And I literally ripped these from the headlines. Every one of these has appeared in the last couple of weeks. And I think most of us look at progress in healthcare, and while we have made some advances, it just doesn't feel like we're going as fast as we could or as we need to. And I do think there's some objective data to support that conclusion. When you go to look for studies that show the value on the investment, particularly in technology, the real ROI, it's kind of elusive. You can find pockets where it's been proven, but lots of areas where it's really not clear that there's been a return for those efforts. The idea that we were going to enable all kinds of strategies through technology, well, some of that's happened, but we still really continue to struggle to align the technology with the operational and clinical and enterprise level strategies of our organizations. We're trying to figure out how to become more service-oriented, to think of patients not just as patients, as consumers, and the kinds of technology that we need for that, and frankly, the kind of experience that they expect in that. And again, I don't think we've really delivered that in healthcare yet. Tactical agility. We seem to really struggle with that. The ability to shift tactics, to adjust. It's hard. And then technically, really, we've delivered a lot of, I'm speaking specifically about information technology here, technology that's non-ambient. And by that I mean it is neither user-friendly or workflow-friendly. Ambient technology recedes into the background. It's an afterthought. It's like putting on a pair of glasses. You don't think about the glasses. You look through them at the world. Clearly, we've not delivered that kind of experience in healthcare. And then lastly, we suffer by comparison. As I like to say, every day I work in healthcare, and then I go home and live in the 21st century. And what we hear are, where are my apps? Patients asking us, why do I still have to answer the same questions every time? Why is the experience of using IT in healthcare so different from the experience in virtually every other aspect of our lives? So I want to go really high level for a couple of minutes because I think at the root of this innovation constipation lies a couple of key things. And perhaps most important is how we think about the approach to improvement. And while there may be many ways to approach improvement, I would argue these two are the most common. Now, on the right, we have the classic moonshot, and that tends to be the way we approach things in healthcare. So there's this long period of planning, lots of time and effort, and then finally one day we flip the switch, and we hope there's going to be this big improvement that follows from that. Now, the reality is, we might fail, right? The rocket may go up and come down, and we've certainly read stories of, big things that were launched only to be turned off fairly quickly. More often, though, what we see is this. There's a peak, and then a decline, and then we go into what we talk about as optimization. Everybody doing optimization right now? Yeah, you probably are. And at the end of the day, we've expended an awful lot of effort. We probably did not achieve the full improvement that we expected, and my guess is you measure the area under the curve. It's not very efficient. Now, I contrast that with the approach on the right, classic rapid cycle improvement. Now, I learned this back in my days in clinical work, but I think it applies to the work we're all doing as well. This approach says, it's really not about this long-term planning and then the big moonshot. Instead, what it says is, we're going to break this down into small steps. We're going to do these very short plan, do, check, and repeat cycles. It's based on the work of Deming and Nolan and others. It's been very, very successful in other industries. And as you can see, it's more of a stepwise thing. We do a little effort, we see some improvement, we do the next effort, and we build towards the ultimate return we're looking for. So I think this is really, really important. And the reason I think so is this compare and contrast. So on the one hand, we've got these very long planning cycles. On the other, we're doing very short cycles. Perhaps most important is the way we think about failure, and therefore our willingness to absorb risk. So on the moonshot side, boy, failure is a huge risk, and people will notice, and it can have a real impact on careers and organizations. On the left, when we do rapid cycle, really there's no such thing as failure, because the whole point is to run the experiment, learn from it, adjust, do the next experiment. In my experience, and if you look at the literature, what you see are these rapid, sustained return on investment and value on investment, as opposed to the moonshot, where it's often deferred or maybe not even clear. There's another really important aspect to this. Who's involved? And so typically in rapid cycle, we really are gathering a diverse group of people. It's not just the experts, it's the people in the front line actually doing the work. Whereas in moonshot, typically the experts dominate the process. And as a result, it often ends up being kind of boring and frustrating, particularly for those where the project's going to be done to them rather than with them. Now, contrast that again with rapid cycle, where classically it involves bringing together a diverse group of people. You're doing it together. It's actually quite fun and quite stimulating, and they see the improvement and they buy in, and so the whole change management piece is almost built into it. All right, so at this point you're going, what the heck does this have to do with interoperability? So let's begin to shift this to the world of technology. Those of you who have been involved in development know we've undergone a huge change in the way we approach software development in general. Now, I grew up on the right-hand side of this. It was all waterfall, and it looks like a moonshot. It's this series of carefully planned, long, drawn-out steps, and one day we get to the place where we turn it on, and hopefully it all works. What I find interesting is they have maintenance at the bottom, but they don't reference optimization. Contrast that with the left side, which is really how modern day software is developed. It's very agile. We're not talking about months. We're talking about products that can be delivered incrementally and that can be improved in a matter of weeks. Now, I have some real personal experience with this. My company, Sansoro, produces APIs for healthcare integration. And in fact, we can turn out a new API every 2 to 4 weeks. Think about what that means for our business partners. One of my partners needs some integration. They need a change in an API. We're not going through a big waterfall process here. We literally can turn out that change and deliver it to our entire customer base in a matter of weeks. To me, this is a huge and essential difference. And it also applies to how we approach interoperability. So let's slow down for a minute and really talk about this. Primarily in healthcare, we are pursuing interoperability through consensus strategies. It's been the way we've done things historically. And the idea is we're going to get all the experts together and they're going to sit in a room and eventually they will come down from the mountain and deliver the tablets. And then the rest of us will accept that and it'll be wonderful. Unfortunately, I think that carries some real challenges and some real risk because consensus inevitably means compromise. It means that we're probably going to get our products and the results more slowly and at higher prices. And it can result in this misalignment between the incumbents, the customers, and those who are trying to innovate. As the incumbents, frankly, try to manage that consensus process to their benefit. And often, particularly in healthcare, it results in pseudo standards. So we have a habit of doing this. We call something a standard, but then we say off to the side, but if you want to do it a little differently, that's okay. Now, I contrast that consensus approach, again, which I would liken to a moonshot, with competitive strategies, which I think are more rapid cycle in nature. So they thrive on competition. And because of that, they produce this fluid, rapid, kind of Darwinian evolution. Better products, better teams, better services evolve and emerge more quickly, and they do it organically. And it results, frankly, by its very nature, in better alignment between those who are trying to innovate and those who are customers for that innovation. And at the end of the day, it results in more choices. And I think that's extremely important as we look at very complicated things like interoperability. All right, so let me get really, really granular about it now, because it's my view that APIs really are the only agile, the only rapid cycle type approach to integration and to interoperability. So let's talk about this for a minute. Because tomorrow you're going to hear from some folks, and listen, they're very smart, intelligent folks, who are big proponents of things like FHIR. But let's think about that for a minute. Look at the history of things like HL7 and extracts and others. These were really slow to develop and deploy. They're hard to scale and reuse. They tend to expose complexity, but limit power. And they almost always favor a waterfall development. So if I want to use these in my products, I'm often forced into a waterfall type approach. And I worry about approaches and things like FHIR. I'm not against it, let me be very clear. I welcome it, I think it's an addition. But what concerns me is an industry betting on one solution coming out from one large group. That to me feels like a moonshot, and it feels unduly risky. I believe we should have competition and more openness, and that, let a lot of solutions blossom and give innovators and customers and developers choices. And so to me, APIs, application programming interfaces, are really the only way to go given our current technology. They can be rapidly deployed. My product can deploy in a matter of hours as opposed to months for the typical integration. It's highly scalable and reusable. This is the industrialization of healthcare IT. Traditional technologies, they're handcrafted, they're one by one. In the world of APIs, they're not. They're scalable, they're reusable, and they hide complexity and expose power. So what do I mean by that? In the real world, this is how Amazon and UPS collaborate, for example. It's how Amazon can tell you that UPS just dropped that package off at your doors. They don't care about underlying data structures or business rules on either side. What they've done is they've exposed powerful APIs that allow their different applications to talk to each other and collaborate in really powerful ways without worrying about that complexity that's behind the scenes. And to my mind, this is the only approach that fosters agile development. So if we want all of those really terrific companies that are out there trying to develop and deliver either better solutions or new solutions, we want them to be agile. We don't want them to be hostage to technologies, particularly around integration, that slow that process. So this is a little controversial, so let me be clear in what I'm saying here. I'm not dumping on fire. I welcome it. I've got some concerns about how fast we're going to see it, about how robust it's really going to be, about the emerging concerns about there will be variations in how it's implemented, and frankly, the unknowns around cost. So I welcome it, but I welcome it in what I think should be a broad and competitive landscape where we have not just fire, but lots of other choices as well. The last thing I want to talk about is culture, because I'm a big believer that culture and leadership influence everything. They are the work in many cases, and they drive so much of what we do and how we do it. And so at this point, you're scratching your head a little bit and wondering, what is he talking about? Well, let's imagine a continuum where people are making choices, where organizations are making choices. And they kind of fall on a spectrum between collaboration and control. And let's imagine there are 5 points on this continuum. It's a kind of normal distribution. And over here from A to E, we move from highly collaborative to highly controlling. So what is the impact of this? Well, over here on the collaborative side, we see organizations that not only expect disruption, but they invite it. Why are they doing that? It's because they believe that this promotes competition, that that's good, that it can disrupt incumbents when they need to be disruptive. They believe in grow the pie business models. In other words, we can actually all do better together. We don't have to fight over the slice of the pie. And they believe that winners should emerge organically, and that the best way for that to happen is through competition and through natural alignments. Now, often when I hear this, and I talk about this, the pushback I get is, well, but that doesn't make sense in terms of a business model. Well, let me suggest to you that's actually got it exactly backwards. And if you're not familiar with the work that's been done under the term firms of endearment, I urge you to take a look at it. These are companies like Southwest, Johnson & Johnson, and others that have actually shown an incredible economic performance in return. Typically, they look at 18.4% annual growth rates at 5 years. Now, if that's over at point A, what's going on over at point E? Well, here I see stasis. This is an inhibition of competition. This is a strategy that favors the incumbents. This is the belief that what we're really doing is fighting over the slice of the pie. We can't grow the pie, so I'm going to fight to get my share. And what you see are winners being handpicked. So every once in a while, I'll see an announcement where big organization X has decided to partner with big organization Y to solve problem Z. And I know some people are applauding that, but in the back of my mind, I'm going, yeah, but what if that's not the combo I wanted? What if I really want a completely different pair? Why are these two organizations deciding what my choices will be? And to make this stick, you will see rent-seeking behaviors. By that, I mean when you start to examine business agreements, legal agreements, and other things, you will see the incumbent taking advantage of their market position rather than partnering with customers and other innovators. And so you'll see gag clauses. You'll see agreements where the incumbent takes a disproportionate share of profits. You will see termination clauses that make it easy for the incumbent to kick out the innovator or to take their IP. There's a lot of asymmetry there. And if you don't believe me, it's out there. You can find this kind of information. What I find interesting is that when you challenge an organization like that, they will say, well, but that's my business model. I've got to protect my turf. This is the only way. I understand that interest. I just think they're misguided and misinformed. And again, I would contrast the firms of endearment approach, this idea of we're going to collaborate, that disruption is good, that working with other innovators and competitors and customers is good, which can show a 10-fold annual return compared to the traditional approach. So I always like to leave folks with, some practical ideas, things you can try at home. So my first piece of advice to you is recognize that you have a choice when it comes to improvement methodology. Sometimes you've got to do moonshot. There's just no choice. But remember, even the original moonshot was broken down into a series of stages. We achieved orbit, then we learned how to go to the moon and come back. When you have the chance, opt for rapid cycle. Maybe you haven't done this before, or maybe you're a little leery about it. Let me assure you about bullet point number 2. It's actually pretty easy to do a rapid cycle trial of rapid cycle improvement. And I urge you to do that. There's a host of materials about how to take this approach, and I've included a little primer in the appendix of my deck as well. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about it. As you can see, I'm kind of an evangelist for it because I've seen it work so many times. Experiment with APIs. I got to tell you, it still stuns me. I go to speak to medical technology offices, and I'll sometimes get this look of, what are these APIs you speak of? Well, they're running the rest of the digital economy. So banking, finance, retail, logistics, they all figured this out. There's something there for healthcare as well. And so I urge you to experiment with APIs, and it turns out, again, because of the rapid cycle nature of APIs, that's very easy to do. It's inexpensive. You can deploy it quickly. It's typically minimal burden on the IT shop, and it allows you to innovate, experiment, and expand over time in very agile kinds of ways. And then 2 behavioral points. Model collaborative behavior and insist that others do the same. Is your organization information blocking? Are you sitting in discussions where people are trying to figure out, well, can we leverage the hoarding of this data to our advantage? Some people have said that's shameful. I'm not sure I'd go quite that far. What I would argue is, I think it's unwise. Compete on your ability to create actionable information, not by hoarding data. And frankly, I think it's a losing strategy, because I think inevitably we will be forced to share if we don't figure out that it's the wise thing to do. And as you look at your vendor partners, are they behaving in open collaborative ways, or are they behaving in highly controlling ways? And if they're behaving in highly controlling ways, challenge them. You are their customer after all. You did pay for the product after all. And then lastly, change management. Remember, culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning. And you must start with this. You have to build it in, you have to plan for it. And lastly, I would argue, rapid cycle approaches do that by the nature of how they pull in others. So to summarize all of this, historically in healthcare, I think we've pursued moonshot types approaches to our problems, whether they're clinical, operational, or technical. And I want to suggest to you today that we have an alternative, that there's a more agile and rapid cycle approach, that this has implications for clinical improvement, for operational improvement, and for the way we pursue technology in healthcare, all the way down to the pursuit of true interoperability, meaningful integration of applications, and the like. So this is a moment for us in healthcare to choose a different path. And obviously, you all know where I stand on that question. So thank you all.
Thanks. Did you hear anything I said? Okay. I totally appreciate and agree with the modeling collaboration. But I guess I'm wondering, have you seen examples of that where that's happening or increasing? Because what I've seen from my vantage point is previously, great collaborative areas of the country have degenerated into bastions of competitiveness and information blocking. And so I would like to hear, is there a beacon of, some place that we can look to that is taking your approach?
Well, certainly on the technical side, I see lots of companies and sort of ecosystems that are emerging to do that. I think you were speaking specifically to healthcare organizations. Am I right? Yes. Well, it's interesting. We've been through this period of consolidation, and it's continuing, right? I mean, we're gobbling up what we can and consolidating. Where I'm seeing it and where I'm hopeful is really around value-based care. And as folks start to recognize that the idea that they were going to own everything, including a single technology platform, they're reaching the edge of that. And in fact, in some ways, the consolidations have driven that, because I may have started 5 years ago and I go, you know what, we're going to put everything on EMR Y or Z, and it'll be great. And then they go buy somebody else, and all of a sudden they've got something else to deal with. So for me, the greatest hope is really as people try to figure out how to form ACOs that are functional, clinically integrated networks in particular, where we've got to figure out how to move data across those different ecosystems. And the reason I'm hopeful there is because there's a real alignment of both the clinical and the financial drivers there. So that's where I find the hope. Now, some of us were a little concerned with the last election about, well, what would happen to value-based care? Would this take the steam out of it? And I think, fortunately, that does not seem to be happening. In fact, I saw an article this morning saying, no, in fact, it seems to be maintaining, and in some ways, we're seeing more evidence that they work. So I'm very hopeful around that. At the end of the day, if we can align those business and economic cases, then I think things like data hoarding will really become a secondary.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate it. And again,
Thanks, everybody.